So let's start with a quick background of the Muskrat Falls project and why it ended up nearly doubling its estimated costs.
So the Muskrat Falls project was a project to dam the lower Chilchill River. It was supposed to cost 6.2 billion initially. For a little bit of perspective, that's about $12,000 for every single man, woman, and child living in Newfoundland, Labrador. But as government projects tend to do, the cost has ballooned up because of a poor oversight and some issues with planning to $13 billion roughly. And that's about $25,000 for every man, woman, and child living in Labrador.
And CTF is now criticizing Newfoundland and Labrador's per-person program spending. So how does all of this compare to other provinces?
Well, Newfoundland and Labrador has the highest per person spending in the country, and by a significant margin. The province currently spends about $14,000 per person per year. To put it into perspective, Ontario spends about $10,000, or if you want to have some provinces with similar population density, Manitoba spends about $12,000, and Saskatchewan $12,500. So there's a significant difference in how much Newfoundland and Labrador spends versus the other provinces. And when government of Newfoundland and Labrador mandated some private sector people to look into its finances, what they found is that it could save $1.2 billion a year, or about 10% of its budget, if it had a spending level that's similar to the rest of Canadian provinces.
So how is this Muskrat Falls bailout structured, and how does all of this impact Canadian taxpayers, sir?
Well, let's be very clear. Muskrat Falls might be the fake fuel that the government is using, that the federal government is using, but this is very much a bailout of the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. So there's $2 billion that's going right now to bail out the hydro project, whether it is a dam itself or the transmission line to get to Newfoundland from Labrador. And there's another $3.2 billion over the next 26 years that the federal government is going to give. 3.2 billion in total over 26 years of the annual payments to help offset the rate increases from the Muskrat Falls project.
Now, the CTF is also saying that this government bailout should lead to change in the province when it comes to spending. So what kind of steps should the province take to reduce their spending, sir?
Well, of course, it should lead to change because what the government is doing right now is it's kind of sending a buoy to stop Newfoundland and Labrador from drowning in debt. That being said, if this doesn't come with spending cuts, we'll have to send another bailout a couple of years from now, and then a third bailout and a fourth bailout. So we want to avoid that. Earlier this year, the government of Newfoundland and Labrador published a report from its economic recovery team that pointed out these issues with spending, this $1.2 billion extra that it spends compared to other provinces. And what it suggested in there, which we think is very sensible, is to reduce the number of bureaucrats, to freeze the salaries of bureaucrats for a certain number of years, and of course to look for efficiencies within government in order to reduce the total costs of government and make sure it's sustainable.
So what's at risk here, sir, if the province continues on this path? I know you mentioned there's future bailouts that have potential as well. What would that look like for Canadian taxpayers if Newfoundland and Labrador keeps heading this way?
Well, there's two things that are at risk. First of all, for Newfoundland and Labrador, if the government cannot balance its budget, if it is not sustainable, it'll just keep going deeper and deeper into debt, which means that it'll spend a larger share of its revenues only to cover interest payments on its debt, as opposed to giving services to its citizens or putting a little bit of money back in their pockets for tax cuts. But the other thing this means for Canadian taxpayers is that, well, Newfoundland and Labrador is not the only province that's watching this. There's a lot of other premiers that are watching this. There's a lot of other boondoggles in every other province. I'm thinking of the Ontario Green Energy Act, for instance, where premiers would like to get their hands on federal money. And once that signal is sent, I can tell you there's going to be a bunch of premiers lining up to get their hands on more taxpayers' money from Ottawa, and it's going to be very costly for us as a taxpayer. Because after all, whether it is federal, provincial, or municipal, we're the ones who are stuck paying.
All right, sir, we'll definitely have to keep an eye on this situation, but thank you again for joining us on Forum Daily, sir.